Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen. This is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, and welcome to Scare-A-Thon 2025, benefiting the International Rescue Committee. And tonight, we're going to be chatting with members of the Losers Club podcast. Let's bring everybody in. And let's say hello to McKenzie Gerber.
Hi there.
Randall Colburn.
Hey, Rockin' Randall here.
And returning to the doc's office, Jenn Adams.
Hello, it's Jenn the Rage Adams, excited to talk about horror and Stephen King and Halloween.
And that is, in fact, what we will be doing, because the Losers Club, for those who don't know, what are you doing here? How did you tune in? Losers Club is a Stephen King podcast that's been running since 2017, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
How many episodes have you racked up over the course of that time?
I wish I knew.
I know we don't count them.
Hundreds and hundreds. And there's there's a lot of lost episodes too. Just stuff that we recorded in the very early days that I don't think survived particular migrations. So
when I snuck onto Spotify, you have like the little intro trailer, and it talks about that you're doing a big kind of upgrade right now of some of the episodes. Is that still valid?
Yeah. I mean, the earliest ones we used to record in Mac's apartment.
That's right.
And I'll use one mic.
Yeah, this microphone.
Oh, wow.
So they're very tinny, I think, some of the early ones. So I know some of our earlier episodes. Mike and Kyle are our loyal and fierce editor. He has done a lot of work on some of those too to make them a little bit more palatable.
Right. So none have been lost by design yet.
Well, I think like when I say the lost ones, I more mean like, when we would do sort of loose news episodes, like back in, like the earliest days of the pod. Like I remember recording stuff like in your bedroom, Mac, like at one point, like me, you and Justin just sharing one mic. And I don't know if those episodes exist anymore, but they were fun.
I'm sure a lot of them do. But like if you're talking like Hollywood King or Needful Tweets stuff that pertained solely to like that moment in time.
Yeah.
I don't know if we were precious about keeping that.
I can't wait to see what YouTube's captioning does with Needful Tweets or whatever you just said.
That's one of our segments where we talk, because King is very prolific on social media, so sometimes we talk about his social media activity, and
his short form writing.
Back in the days,
we
least.
cheekily dubbed it Needful Tweets. So.
Needful Tweets. Okay, got it. Really quick, well, since we've already kind of touched on it, like how did the Losers Club come to be? What's the origin story here?
That's a fun question, just because, me and Mac and his brother Justin, and then Mike and Dan Caffrey, these are kind of the core group that started the pod back in 2017. We're all friends. A lot of them went to college together. I made friends with them in Chicago. I'm from Detroit, but they, like, we all worked together at a site called Consequence of Sound, which is now called Consequence. And we all, were freelancers or employees there at one point. We all wrote about music and film. And, we had I think like we were very good at yapping at each other about movies and music and all those sorts of things. And one of the things we always had in common was Stephen King and how much we love Stephen King. And so there was one feature that we did at Consequence where we basically designed, this was like 2015, 2016. It was like our own like Marvel style Stephen King cinematic universe. And we mapped out what it would be. And we had a lot of fun putting that together. And then around that same time, we made a fake podcast. It wasn't really fake. I mean, it was real, but we were annoyed by how annoying the Consequence Radiohead fans were, because it was around the time like Moonshaped Pool came out, and people were being really annoying about it, because we love Radiohead, but like the fans can be really obnoxious. So we wanted to kind of troll people a little bit. So we started a podcast that we called like the Definitive Radiohead Podcast. It was called Radioheads with a Z. And it was like, we'll do definitive breakdowns of every album. But then, we did Pablo Honey, and we like talked about like half the songs, and then we were like, the rest aren't that good anyways. It was just like total, and we would just get facts wrong and stuff. And then Dan Caffrey would do like extended like discussions of Jaws 2 in the middle of the episode that didn't relate. Mac, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, and I'm a huge Radiohead fan, and I wasn't even on. I wasn't on the podcast.
And I'm like a mild fan, and I was on it, but people got really mad, and we only did like 4 or 5. We did like 5 or 6 episodes of that, and then it was just a goof, so we didn't keep doing it. But we really enjoyed podcasting together. So I think we were all out bowling once, and then I think we just started talking about what if we did a real podcast that we put our efforts into. What is something we all have in common? And it was I can't remember who said it, but one of us was just like, well, we all love Stephen King, and so it kind of came together pretty quickly after that. And then, we recorded, like, our first episode was Carrie. We just talked about the book, and it was like me, Mac, Dan Caffrey, Mike Rothman, Justin Gerber, and then Allison Shoemaker may or may not have been on that episode. She was on early episodes of Losers Club and is still a good friend. And so that's kind of the origin of it. But I think we thought we would just kind of go through the books, but then, we were like, oh, we'll probably wrap it up in a couple years, because there's obviously a lot of books, but now we're still doing it. And we kind of are mostly done with the books by this point. Right. So the pod's really grown beyond, I think, the initial boundaries we set for it.
It's been a cavalcade, a rolling roll call of people over the years now. And a lot of people have joined, obviously Jenn, and
I want Jenn
she's been doing a fantastic job for a long time. I've kind of moved to the back for the last few years, focusing on Halloweenies, but still obviously involved, here and there.
Yeah, Halloweenies is kind of an outgrowth of it that took on its own life, which is more of a horror franchise pod. Mm-hmm. But I'd love for Jenn to talk about how she got involved, because in my opinion, Jenn saved the podcast when we probably would have ended it around 2020.
It was around 2020,
Yeah, so why don't you tell how you got involved?
Well, it's funny. I have a friend who sent me the Consequence article saying a new Stephen King podcast, The Losers Club, is starting. And she was like, I think you would like this. So I was a listener from the very beginning and was really into it. And, it's the whole thing. I felt like I was part of a conversation that I couldn't contribute to. So I was like, I've got thoughts too. And so I just started following everybody on social media. And then I was doing another podcast. So I was in the podcasting world. And then Mike, one of our other co-hosts, was doing an unrelated show about Breaking Bad. And he tweeted, he said, who can talk to me about Breaking Bad in like 2 hours? And I could, and I responded. And so we just met that way and became friendly. And then I was like, hey, I'm a listener and I really like Stephen King a lot. And so I just kind of started guesting on episodes around the beginning of 2020. And Randall and I always joke about this because it was either my first or second episode where we were recording and then the episode ended and we realized that the NBA season had been canceled because of COVID. So it was like,
oh wow,
rise of COVID.
And so that was just a huge timestamp there. And then just kind of eventually worked my way in. And I didn't actually meet anybody in person for about 3 years, I think. So
that was on purpose, though. That wasn't because of COVID.
I knew it this whole time.
It all comes out here.
But no, that was a rough time because it wasn't just COVID. There was a lot of, I think, upheaval around that time. Like, we had people who were moving, going back to grad school. There was and then other people just moving on to other projects and different focuses. So there was this spell where the only people who were consistently available to work on the show were Mike and I. And we both were very busy in our own lives in various things. And it was one of those where, and up to that point, we had gotten through the late 80s, early 90s, I think, of King's work. So we didn't want to end it, but it was one of those where it was just we don't have enough manpower to keep this going at the scale we had been doing it. And we were just so tired. And then Jenn sort of swooped in and saved our asses a couple of times on episodes where we just needed another voice. And then I was like, she's amazing and she's knowledgeable and she's charming and she can, the thing with us, just probably hearing me talk now, you probably understand, is my wife always says, I'm when I talk to my friends, it's like a snake eating its own tail. We yap, and it's hard to keep up sometimes. And we have bits and we're obnoxious and but we also we'll pivot between thoughtful commentary and then a bunch of fart jokes. And that's part of, to me, the charm of our podcast. But I think Jenn could instantly mesh with us, and not everybody could, because we brought in different people throughout because
yeah, do you want to name all those people and their home addresses?
No, it's just like I think like the pod's a lot of work because you got to read all these books, and so we kind of needed to bring people in to help out because we couldn't read every book. Every person couldn't read every book, not on the scale we were doing. So so we needed other people who could roll with us and then also had a passion to really engage with King in this way. And that's where Jenn was like a total lifesaver, because when we needed her most, she kind of came in and then gave us like a really strong third like anchor to keep the pod going. So nothing but love.
Yeah, that was interesting too, to realize once we started doing it that, if we're going to have a guest, are they going to be okay being on this for 3 hours? You know,
yeah.
It was,
our episodes were exhaustive.
It was kind of eye-opening in that sense. It was like, we have to figure out how to do that, and are people going to do this? And we did. We were lucky enough to have some guests and stuff like that. But I think that was the main reason why some people rolled in and rolled out. Was I think it was a commitment, and you have to really want to be there and sit there and record for hours on end. You know.
I have to tell a quick funny story because how this came to be is that Dan Caffrey and I are pals from Chicago days, and we'd kind of drifted apart. And then I was doing a show about the 1983 triple feature of Stephen King with Christine, Cujo, and the Dead Zone, and I was going to have my pal Darren Callahan on, and he said, this guy Dan Caffrey, he really likes Stephen King. You should probably get him on. And I'm like, Dan Caffrey, like the playwright Dan Caffrey? And he's like, well, and also the Losers Club, co-host. And I went, oh, okay, hang on. And so he came on and we were covering these 3 movies, and I'm trying to wrap it up around like, an hour 20. And he's like, oh no, we just keep going. Like the idea that we were going to be done talking about 3 movies over the course of an hour was just like foreign to him.
It's hard. I mean, I have a spin-off podcast about Clint Eastwood, and that's an hour, and I am there with a whip, and I try so hard to keep that in an hour. And it's hard when you have these guys that they would talk for 5 hours if they could about this stuff. And
they have great things to say,
Yeah.
Right.
You want to keep it all in.
Well, and that's the thing too. Like, we all are so passionate about Stephen King, even if it's a title that we don't necessarily love. And like, if we're going to cover a book, I want to do it justice. And sometimes that means, I think 4 hours is the longest one I've ever been on. But I've heard tale of the Night Shift episodes that may have
Night
lasted.
Shift episode, that was like 8 hours.
8 hours, like 2 sessions, broken up by lunch.
Yeah. Well, broken up by lunch, yeah. The length to me was a feature, not a bug, because I think that I had 2 podcasts that I liked about video games that were sort of my inspiration for how to approach the pod. One was called Retronauts and one was called Kane and Rince. And I don't know if they're still around, but because all I do is read Stephen King now. So it's, but they were really good podcasts that they sort of embraced the length, and their episodes would be 2.5, 3.5 hours sometimes. And they would really sort of dig into every aspect of these games. And I think as somebody, we all were versed in various ways in literary criticism, and we all like have a lot of passion for Stephen King. So I think that the length to me, I was like, I want to embrace, because I think a lot of people like longer podcasts too.
Yeah,
because they can be meditative after a while. Like you check in, you check out. And I know I'm like that with podcasts a lot. And so I thought it would help us, in a way stand out. And I think it has.
Yeah. And I think if you're going to read a Stephen King book that's like 800 pages, you're probably going to be down for a longer episode.
Yeah. Right. You want somebody who's going to give it the attention that you gave it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, since, we're talking Stephen King, do you remember like each of you, like how you came to Stephen King, like maybe what your first one was? I'm sure you maybe touched on this in episodes in the past, but here we all are. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, I think the first full novel I read was The Stand. I read it after the 94 miniseries, and it's still my favorite of all time. But I think my first actual contact with King was seeing books on my dad's shelf. And I remember I've said this a couple of times because I just think it's so funny. I looked at that cover of It, and it's the paperback cover, and it's got claws through the sewer grate. And I thought it was a dinosaur. I was like, what's this book about dinosaurs? And I was just intrigued by the size of it too. And so I think the first thing I ever picked up was Night Shift. And so I was drawn to either the Mangler or the Boogeyman because those titles are just so evocative. And I used to like cart it around with me to slumber parties and like make my friends listen to me read these stories aloud. And those are so short, you can do them really quickly. But then I think once I read The Stand, it was over. I was like, this felt like an accomplishment to finish it. I fell in love with these characters, and it was the first like real adult fiction I'd ever read.
Mac, how about you?
Yeah, I originally my brother was reading like Misery whenever we'd go visit my grandparents because they had Misery and something like Christine or something on the shelf, or Gerald's Game or something. And I remember first seeing it there. My first King book that I read was weirdly The Gunslinger. It was for school, and it was not at all what I would come to know and love as I mean it was it was a weird first book. I didn't come back to the Dark Tower series for a while, but yeah, and then honestly, because I was not ever like a huge reader, coming back to this podcast was kind of my entry point back into reading a lot. And Carrie was probably the other first big King book I actually sat and read. And then all of these were really my first reads for a lot of them, minus the Dark Tower series. I think I went back and I finished that before I read everything else. But
yeah, Mac was kind of our newbie. He was a lot of us were rereading books for the pod, and he was often reading them for the first time.
But I like lived and breathed all the miniseries and anything that came out on television or the movies. I'd seen and consumed a lot of that stuff, and that was kind of like, oh, now I can see where all this came from.
Randall, what was your origin?
Yeah. The earliest things I think I remember seeing Zelda from Pet Sematary, the movie. Like I would turn on HBO or something and see it, and it scared the living daylights out of me. So I think I was really sensitive to horror when I was little. But I got really into Michael Crichton because of Jurassic Park. And then that was sort of my first adult books that I read. So I read like every Michael Crichton book. And then, so I felt like I'd sort of whet my appetite. And then I watched the 1994 miniseries, The Stand, and then I was obsessed with it. So my story is actually quite similar to Jenn's. Because not only was that one of my inciting moments, but also my grandma had this. She had The Dead Zone, The Shining, and Christine copies, like old paperbacks in her basement, and I used to sneak down when I was over at her place and just flip and find the gory parts and just read those. And then my parents got me The Stand for Christmas one year. And that was like just total same as Jenn, like where it was a journey and it was hard, but it was like, the biggest book I'd ever read. And I was so proud of it. And I still love it to this day. So,
well, this year we've had a bunch of Stephen King adaptations. I was kind of tallying them up. We got The Monkey and Life of Chuck and Long Walk and Running Man coming out later this year. Because that was I think I probably knew of Stephen King from the movies. I think Carrie was probably one of the first that I'd seen. Dead Zone, The Shining. The first couple Stephen King film adaptations are genuinely good.
Oh, yeah.
You got Carrie and Salem's Lot and The Shining, even though The Shining's maybe not the best adaptation, it's a great movie.
It's great.
Right around 1983, when King's name was the thing that would sell the title, you didn't have the same level of directors and actors and things like that. So I think we started to see a little bit more variation, shall we say, in terms of the quality that came out from Stephen King. But I do want to just kind of shift to that, since we do kind of talk horror movies here. Do you have like a favorite or favorites Stephen King adaptations?
Yeah, like Stand By Me is up there for me. Mm-hmm. Stand By Me is a beautiful, beautiful film that I've loved since I was a kid, and I love the story it's based on as well. In terms of, I think, like the more horror side, The Shining is absolutely up there, even though, yeah, like you said, King is not a huge fan of it, and it is a big deviation from his book. And then I think I'm always going to have a really soft spot for this Stand miniseries, even though we make fun of it all the time because there's a lot to make fun of. But that was so seminal to me. And there's parts of it that feel that still work to this day. And then, but yeah, like all those early ones, like the Carrie is an incredible film. Dead Zone is a fantastic film, and then Misery, Rob Reiner's Misery, I think is absolutely fantastic. And then, you know, we can talk about it more in a little bit, but for me, I think like The Long Walk is my favorite King book, like since 2000, or movie since 2000 or so, like of this century so far. I mean, I think it's up there with like Mike Flanagan's Gerald's Game and Frank Darabont's The Mist. I think those are both incredible as well. But The Long Walk to me really, really worked.
Well, you covered most of them, but I'll echo you on The Stand, and the It miniseries was formidable for me. I mean, that was one of the first things I watched that was a Stephen King property, essentially, and I loved Tim Curry, and I was so impressionable. I was probably the age of those kids, and I absolutely loved that. The Dead Zone, probably watched that way too young, but that stuck with me for a long time. And then, yeah, I mean, I couldn't believe my eyes when watching The Long Walk recently. And then Carrie, of course.
I think early loves were Pet Cemetery, of course. I remember I found that VHS and Children of the Corn at a slumber party, and nobody would watch it with me, but I was like, I need to talk about what's I see on this cover. I also grew up watching Sometimes They Come Back on USA, so I'll always have a soft spot for that. The Dark Half also. It's pretty good. Yeah. And then, but I think my favorites, I have to go with my heart. I am a big Mike Flanagan fan, and I love Gerald's Game. I think I thought for a long time that was an unfilmable book. Like I think a lot of us did.
Yeah.
Exactly. And seeing what he did with it just blew my mind. And then I saw Dr. Sleep, and I love Dr. Sleep. Also, I'm a big defender of that book. And I think, you know, I have some issues with The Shining, with Kubrick's The Shining. And I think the way Flanagan managed to merge those two, like the novel and the film, really helped me make peace with a lot of those issues. And so I watched both of those movies I watched, and I just was like either crying or like just sitting and staring for like 15 minutes after. I'm like, those really meant something to me. And I think that they evoke like the heart of what those books are. And I think that's Flanagan's strength as a King adapter.
We've been talking a little bit about kind of like the horror. What was maybe your horror journeys? Was Stephen King how you got to horror, or did horror lead you to Stephen King, or none of the above?
Because of like the It miniseries and stuff like that, I feel like King was inadvertently kind of a gateway for me into horror. But mostly my older brother, who's also on the podcast, would just watch a lot of things that I was not supposed to be watching, and would absolutely sneak in and watch, or get home from school and be like, okay, don't tell mom and dad we're watching this. And then I'd watch, you know, a lot of horror that way. I think one of the earliest things I watched was Psycho. We were at a party at my parents, and they just turned on something. They're like, "Oh, it's black and white. Okay, cool. Watch this while you're stay in the room, and we'll have the party." And it was Psycho.
Stay in the room.
So
do not leave.
We ended up watching Psycho. I was very young, probably like 6. So yeah, but that was kind of like my slow roll into horror, was through my older brother, and wanted to spend more time with him than my own set of friends, because I thought he was cool and his friends were cool.
You know, once you were out from underneath the auspices of your older brother, what kept you going on that journey?
Yeah, you know, it's funny because there was a time where, you know, when he went off, he's a few years older than me. So when he left, I was kind of in a place where I was like, oh, well, I guess I had to find my own stuff now, because I always just kind of liked we liked a lot of the same things. And I just found myself continuing to watch. And I think that I'm just drawn to that scare, that dread, but that's like a safe environment where I know it's not real. I know it's not really happening, and I'd rather experience it here, and it's at my own discretion than out here in the real world, which obviously you can get a dime a dozen now these days. But like, I feel like that was kind of the pull. And I also felt like I was kind of weirdly an authority on it with a lot of my friends who were not really into horror at the time. So then I started feeling this, I can impart all these movies to these, you know, Fright Night and, you know, Hellraiser and all these things to my friends. And that was kind of fun to just keep kind of going down that role. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Jenn, how about you?
Well, family lore says that my mom, who does not like horror at all, watched Halloween when she was pregnant with me. And so that is where it all began. But I remember my first horror movie was Fright Night, and I was like 8. I was too young. I took it completely seriously. I did not see any of the comedy in it at all. I was like, this is what vampires are. And I think I was really afraid to watch horror movies for a long time. I was really afraid of like the slasher killers because they just always seemed very soulless, and that was really chilling to me. And so for a long time, King was really my source of horror. Also, I could take a book into my room in a way that I couldn't watch a movie and my parents would find out. And so I would read all of this stuff. I also think King, there's a warmth to King because of the way he writes characters that feels there's a safety there. Even though he's writing about really disturbing, really scary things, I could access that. I could handle it. And then it was really Scream that like made me fall in love with horror movies. And there is a me before I saw Scream and there's a me after. And I have this really strong memory of going to the theater and seeing it. I just got my driver's license. And so that was when I was like, oh, okay, this can be so much more than I thought. And there are so many different ways to access it. This can be a little funny. It doesn't have to, like the ghost face mask, I think was my key into watching the Halloween movies and watching more of the slashers, which were early loves also. So that was really my gateway. And I just got to watch it with my son for the first time. He loved it. And now he's going to be Ghostface for Halloween. And it was a very proud parenting moment.
How old is your son?
He's 11.
Okay, awesome. He's not like 3.
Oh, no. He's not, he was afraid of it for a long time. Watched the first one with the covers over his head and then got through it and like was asking to watch the second and third.
Were you yelling at him to watch it? Like,
I was like, you got it. I was trying to like be encouraging. I was like, I'll tell you when to look away if you want, but you know.
And now you're embroidering the Scream 7 logo
I know.
on the back of this costume.
It's like, should I take him to the screening or maybe I should watch it first? So
Randall, how about you?
I was so scared of blood specifically. Like I just didn't want to see gore at all, but I love to read about it. Like, so like I said, I used to read my my grandma's King books, but just the gory parts because I just had a weird fascination with it. And I used to steal books from my mom. She wasn't into King. She was into Dean Koontz, funny enough. And I read a bunch of her Koontz books, but she also had a copy of Helter Skelter, the Charles Manson book, and I stole it and I read that without her knowing. And that book was like really formative for me in a lot of ways, just in terms of, because there was all the photos in it. It was like and there was like crime scene photos. And I just was weirdly obsessed with it. And a really very similar to King, who was kind of obsessed with the Starkweather killings, the teen couple that killed people. And like I had that fascination, but I could never watch horror movies. I used to watch Unsolved Mysteries. I always kind of cite Unsolved Mysteries as like the scariest things I ever saw when I was really young. I still like literally the scares that I still remember, the stuff that really scarred me was from Unsolved Mysteries episodes. So I think I avoided horror for a while, but the first full-length horror movie I ever watched that I really loved was Poltergeist. And I somehow made it through the face melting scene, which still is really upsetting to this day. But I remember like it was silly enough, that I was, I think, able to reconcile it with the horror of it. And then, it was like a slow drip from there. And I feel like once I started seeing horror movies in theaters with people, and that's how I most enjoy consuming them. So I feel like that's when I got really into horror, was watching it with big crowds, because it's so fun. You know what I mean? But you had a question about your horror mentor. I love that question because I was thinking about it and I was like, oh my God, it's Brian, this guy I worked with. I worked at Eddie Bauer when I was in high school, the clothing store. And you wouldn't think that that would be a haven for an absolute horror lunatic. But one of my coworkers is named Brian, and he was a very unassuming, sweet guy. He's a couple of years older than me. And he found out I liked movies like Scream and stuff, So then he was like, you want the real shit? He talked to me like that. And I was like, okay, yeah. And he's like, this movie's like a 3 on my gore scale. And he gave me Lucio Fulci's The Beyond, which is not a 3 on my gore scale.
No.
Like that is. And so I got 10 minutes into it and I couldn't handle it. But then I always think about this. Like he actually is the one who got me to watch Dawn of the Dead, the original. Like he's like, maybe you can handle this, you know? And then I did, and I loved it. And still to this day, one of my favorite horror movies. But like, I'll always remember if you have Chicago ties, you probably remember the Music Box of Horrors, like the 24-hour horror.
Oh yeah, it's coming up in a couple weeks.
Yeah, and so like I went one year, I think with Mac and some of our buddies, and I didn't know they were showing The Beyond, the Fulci movie. And so it started, and I was like, this is familiar. And then this was probably like 8 or 9 years ago. And I was like, this is familiar. And then I was like, oh no, it's The Beyond. I can't handle this. But then I stuck it out and I watched it. And now I love that movie. I think it's so good. But there's still parts of it I can't watch. But I always think about like, he was my corruptor in a way. He was the one trying to like push me towards like extreme Italian kind of stuff. And now I can watch a lot of that stuff. But it was like that journey with The Beyond was sort of a long one, you know, that he set into motion.
Jen, did we cite your specific person, or was there a specific person?
You know, I don't know. I was thinking about this. I think podcasts probably were my corruptors because I'm from Nashville. I live just outside of Nashville now. And I don't really know a lot of people in my everyday life who like horror. And I grew up kind of feeling isolated with it. I think I've been a corruptor for many people.
You corrupted yourself.
I did corrupt myself. Yeah. But then I just remember listening to a podcast about the loved ones and thinking, I have to talk to somebody about this, because I listened to the podcast and then I watched it and I didn't know anybody who had ever heard of that movie. And so that, I think, caused me to really start reaching out to other people. And now what I find is that a lot more people are into horror. They just don't talk about it that much. And so like, as somebody who is very vocal about my love for scary things, people ask for my recommendations all the time. I tell them I'll spoil things for you if you're worried that it'll be too scary. So I think I'm actually the corruptor for a lot of people.
Thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
Because I grew up kind of in the 70s, you know, kind of pre-VHS and things like that, I think that's what led me to the books, because you couldn't just have any movie that you wanted at any time. Long before I watched Psycho, I had read the book. And long before I watched The Shining, I had read the book. So I was constantly going back to the library. And like, that was how I was going to get to learn about horror. You had instant access to the library. You did not have instant access to these movies. Right. And so that's what kind of led me to Stephen King. I feel like I read most of his books before I saw the films. And I think maybe Pet Sematary might have been the first one that I had read before I had seen it. Pet Sematary, I think, is a pretty decent adaptation. I feel like
I really like it. Yeah.
Like Lambert really gets the feel for that movie. And it's just schlocky enough that it's fun, but it's also scary. The images of Zelda and you know, Little Gage. I mean, all of that is just, it's a really fun horror movie. And I think that's what I like in a horror movie. Because we talked about the movies, I have to ask the question of your favorite books, which is, I know, like choosing one of your children. But let's go with like maybe a top 5 or something, or maybe the ones that feel the most important to you.
For me, it's Wizard and Glass, The Dead Zone, Salem's Lot, It, and oh God. The Stand. The Stand.
Okay. It's not a desert island. You can have more if you want.
It's funny because like some of those, I mean, Wizard and Glass is a weird one. You know, it's like the 4th entry of a series, but like that really does it for me. When I think about some of those other books like It and Salem's Lot and stuff, it's not only that I came to those and maybe I'd seen the television series and whatnot before, but reading those books the first time for me was on this podcast. So it's so tied in with this and with my friends, and just being able to discuss it immediately, you know, every day with them, and then doing the pod, it really kind of solidified those. And there's so much of like, they're very ensemble books like The Stand and It and Salem's Lot. And I feel like, you know, we were always kind of like casting our friends in those roles and things. And it was just felt very like a little community, kind of like what Jen was saying, how she didn't feel like there was a community there. And that was kind of the point of the podcast, was getting together and being able to chat this stuff that we felt was this weird singular thing. And who's going to listen to this 4-hour episode on night shift or whatever? But like,
Me.
there's a lot of people out there that have come out of the woodworks, and that's been awesome. But yeah, those are my 5 top, I think, if I'm being pressed to say it. I'm sure I'm going to look at these. You guys are going to come up with someone and be like,
right.
Well, maybe you'll all be on the same desert island and you can share.
We can share,
yeah.
I do want to just really quick kind of talk about that idea of the community. You asked like, who's going to want a 4-hour podcast? And the answer is you guys do, you are going to be able to enjoy just having that time. It just happened to have the microphones on, like having the conversation, I think is what is so important. And that's kind of what we do at Horror 101 is bring people together so that you can get different people's viewpoints. I wrote a review blog for many years and I was like, I'm just so tired of hearing what I think about movies. What I want to hear is other people's thoughts so that I can see the movie in a different way, or is to have somebody else's input. And I think that's what's important about having that community and having people that you can talk to about these things. And so I'm so thankful for the internet and the fact that we are able to kind of connect with one another in a way that we couldn't. I mean, I grew up not really having a lot of horror friends. And, I remember being on IMDb back in the message board days and just be like, oh my God, there are people out there who care about this the way I care about it. They know about it the way I know about it.
That was huge for me too, the IMDb message boards. That's one of my favorite things about our podcast is that we do bring a lot of differing perspectives. I feel like Jenn sometimes specifically, I feel like you, like if you don't like something or you like something that the rest of us don't, you're like, I feel like you're like insecure about it sometimes. And I'm like, don't be like, that's what makes it good. Is like, and like, and I always or Dan Caffrey's the same way. He'll like apologize when he doesn't like something. And I'm like, no, like be a hater, please. Like, I love different opinion. And like, we've had people on, like we brought on someone to talk about the Dreamcatcher movie, which is like reviled by most people. And they came on to say it's like one of their favorite movies of the 2000s. And I love that. And like my friend Josh came on to talk about 1408, how it's his favorite, like one of his favorite horror movies of all time. Like most people don't say that. Right. So that's the kind of stuff I think I really embrace is like, I don't want people to agree with us all the time, and we don't agree with each other all the time. But I think when I look at my top 5, I've got like certain ones that's in everybody's top 5, like, it's probably in there. And then Salem's Lot, because I love like Mac, I love the ensemble books, but I think like the ones that come to mind, and they're both ensemble books as well, that are a little less, I think, heralded, but are really important to me, is Needful Things. That is easily one of my favorites. I'm obsessed with that book. And that was, I think, partly when I read it. I read it when I was probably just like really hitting my stride as a Stephen King fan when I was 13, 14 or so. And I love the ensemble nature, and I love the comedy in that book too. And then, and I also love the way it was building out Castle Rock, because like by that point I had read books like The Dark Half and books like Stand By Me, although it's called The Body, and a lot of those characters surface in Needful Things, and I thought it was really cool the way that he did it. And so that one, but then also Under the Dome, I think, is one of his better later books, like post 2000 books. I think it's over 1,000 pages. Some people don't love that, and the ending is really divisive, but I've come around to really love the ending of the book. And I think our episodes on that book were huge in me developing a real appreciation for it, like really realizing what he was trying to do with that book. And then, because I loved it when I read it, but I think rereading it and then really digging in for the pod, I think we have a 3-part episode, like 3 episodes that are each like 3 hours, like on that book. So I really came to appreciate it. And then I also think if you really want to understand like who Stephen King is as a person and his youth and the things that he's carrying with him as he gets older, Hearts in Atlantis is, I don't think it's going to be anybody's favorite King book because it's so different from a lot of his other stuff. But in terms of stories about growing up, childhood, losing innocence, and just loss, and also, but then also the way I think he looks at the 60s and the 70s and growing up in an era of like political turmoil and like ideological corruption, like these things are really important, I think, to who Stephen King is. And I've never seen him explore those themes as nakedly as he does in Hearts in Atlantis. And so I wouldn't say it's like in my top 5 necessarily, but I love to shout it out because I think it's a book that doesn't talked about very much, that to me, I feel like I reference more on the pod
Yeah.
to a lot of my favorite books, because to me, it has like a skeleton key quality to understand a lot of his work. But so yeah, I'll throw those out. Jen, how about you?
That's a great. I'm glad you gave some love to Hearts and Lands, because it is one that you just go, wow, what what a passion. There's just such heart,
such passion. It makes me cry. It's like, it
it's
really.
And I agree. I think it's unsung. I forget about it all the time. Jen?
I've thought about this quite a bit, and I like the fact that like I get to choose 5, because The Stand is my number 1 for sure, but then I can't ever decide the order of the rest of them. I think I would say Pet Sematary. That's probably the one I've read more than any. And before I had kids, I used to just like reread that at least once a year. I would read it at the pool a lot. And then also The Shining. Love The Shining. I love Misery. That's the first book that I could not put down. I had to find out what was going to happen at the end. So those 4. And then I had a different 5 until I did our book episode on Gerald's Game, and that bumped that one up into that top 5. I love that book so much. And one thing I find with doing our book episodes, because we have certain categories, we look for the passages that we love, we look for the passages that we don't love so much, and we look at it in a really in-depth way. And I find that every time I revisit a book that I didn't like the first time, I at least have a new appreciation for it, because I'm looking for these things. I'm reading with an eye towards finding things I like, finding things that maybe are not integral to the plot, but really, really sing, especially the way King writes environments, or like just towns and characters, like side characters. Some of his side characters are my favorites. I do think I would be remiss if I did not mention Firestarter, though, because I think I might be the world's most ardent Firestarter defender. It's a problematic book. I talk about it all the time. It's got its problems. It's not a perfect book, but I love that little girl so much. I would die for Charlie McGee, and that book is about burning down the patriarchy, and it's incredible.
This is like a nice segue, because one of my favorite books is The Long Walk. And I remember actually coming to it by accident, because I had just read Thinner, and I was looking for more from this Richard Bachman guy. And this was before Bachman had been revealed to be King.
Oh, wow.
No, so I read it as Richard Bachman. I remember the Twilight Zone magazine had an advertisement for Thinner by Richard Bachman, and my mom got me the book, and I read it. And I went to my little Colorado library in Longmont, and they had a copy of The Long Walk in like that kind of hardbound paperback that you get at the library.
Yeah.
And there was Richard Bachman's name. And so I read The Long Walk, and it killed me.
It's fantastic.
It was just such an incredible, and you talked about the environment and the ensemble. I feel like all of that is in that book, where you get to know these characters and you realize we're going to lose them. We're going to lose every single one of these characters. And that's the only way this book can end. And that was such an incredible read. And I think that's why the movie was considered unfilmable for so long, not just because of the subject matter, but because cinematically, how do you do that? How do you tell a story where it's just a bunch of kids walking down the road, and every once in a while, one of them dies? How cinematic could that possibly be? What we've got in Francis Lawrence's vision is a pretty incredibly faithful telling of it. We're going to talk about some spoilers now for The Long Walk. So if you need to step away, please step away. First off, what were your impressions of the book itself? And then we'll talk about the movie.
I'm a huge fan of that book. That was a big one for me. I think especially just because I read it when I was a young man, and it's a book about like young men and masculinity and male friendship. And I think those themes are really important when you're young to read about. Like a book like Rage, even, which, King took off the market. That's in the same collection though. But that was like an important book for me because I was a young, angry guy too. And I don't think that book led me to think that Charlie was in the right. Like that was a book for me about like the perils of indulging your own, I think, self-hatred and outward hatred. So it's like I really love a lot of those Bachman books, and but Long Walk to me was easily my favorite, and I was so connected to all of those characters. So
Yeah.
Mac?
Yeah, no, I loved it when we first read it, and I was really at odds with a lot of people in the pod at the time, so I was casting them in those roles. No, I'm just kidding.
Warning.
It was one of those things where when you're reading it, you're like, how do people not see that this is King? Because that ensemble thing is very much there. I mean, that's all you have is this ensemble walking down the road. But it was also one of those books for me that had one of those strange nebulous endings that King doesn't always get away with his endings. I mean, I don't know if people agree with me on that front, but he doesn't always stick the landing. But weirdly for me, it was nebulous enough where I was like, oh, this is great, because it can be whatever I want this to really be. And that stuck with me forever. But yeah, it was just brutal. And whenever we were reading any of those stories, I just kept thinking, why aren't they making this? Why are we getting the third remake of Salem's Lot or whatever it is? Like I never understood why they weren't mining some of these other properties. And that's the great thing about over the last 7 years, I guess, we've been getting all these weird stories and things, and they're really mining it now in a good way. Whether or not they're all good, I don't know. But Long Walk is one of them. That is a good one.
And Jen?
I remember I read this one pretty early because my dad had the Bachman books, that 4 collection, and it was pretty short. So I was like, okay, I can down this one pretty quickly. And it's one of those experiences of like reading about a concept that you're really drawn to or really have like a lot of fascination about, but you don't have the label for it. Like I read The Shining really early, didn't realize I was reading about addiction, but that's what I connected with. And I read The Long Walk, and it's just it's filled with boys. It's just a book about boys. And I remember I was reading it and being really drawn to these characters, and I was just reading about different versions of masculinity, which is, as a girl in the South, is something that I was dealing with a lot. And so it helped me kind of contextualize a lot of the things I was seeing with the people around me without really realizing it. And I think that's why I was so drawn to it. And I also have always loved Harold Lauder. Like he's just one of my favorite characters because he's so complex. And I just remember I was reading this and I was like, well, this is a book filled with a lot of different versions of Harold Lauder, like different times in his life, And so I think that was my connection to it. And it's just such a great character driven story.
And they managed to capture a lot of that for the film.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the things. How can you spend enough time? I knew that my cinematic experience was not going to be the same as my literary experience, because you spend so much time with all of them and you grow to really care about most of them. You get to see all the dynamics. And so I've been waiting to see this movie for 40 years, but at the same time kind of dreading seeing this movie for 40 years and going, are they going to do it right?
Oh, we know that story well.
Yeah.
So it was impressive. And I think my takeaway was just that. I was like, they did it right. It's something that will hopefully lead people back to the book as well. And I love the fact that the ending is different, because that was the one of the things when we had our post screening, I said, anybody who hasn't read the book yet, absolutely you should go read the book, because it's different.
Yeah.
And it's different in a really interesting way. The mist all over again.
Yeah, I love the ending. I thought it was, for me, I've never loved the ending of the book. I always thought it was a touch too abstract. And and I think like that's what I love about the movie though, is it's so faithful until it's not. And once, I think if you know the book really well, as soon as Stebbins dies and then it's just McVrees and Garrity, I was like, oh, okay. Like we're heading into uncharted territory. And that's how I always thought the book should have ended, with the two of them. Because Stebbins, to me, I like him a lot more in the movie than I do in the book, because I think they sharpened his character a little bit. I think he's a touch too, he's more of a cipher in the book, at least for me. Yeah. And I think that they sharpened him into a strong archetype, and I thought the performance was strong. So when he went, I was like, okay, now we're going to get, I think like we're going to get at what's really the heart of the story, which is that relationship. And then also I think the way in which, like, and then when Garrity died, I was like blown away. I was like, and I was like, yes. Cause I'm like, they're doing something new and it's interesting and it's challenging. Like, I don't mind changing the text so long as you're doing something that I feel like is in line with what King was trying to do.
Sure.
And also good, like compelling. Like changing it just to change it is lame. But like, I felt like every decision was really thought through there. And then it ended up making this really strong point about a crushed ideology or a crushed idealism. And then, because you kind of just see that Garrity and McVries are on these two sort of different paths, where you see Garrity, who's really been radicalized, becoming like learning to find beauty in relationships and life and everything else. Whereas McVries already has that sort of optimism, and it's crushed in him by the end because he's had to watch all of his friends die. And I think that narrative trick, and we interviewed the screenwriter JT Molnar on the pod, and he had some really cool things to say about all this, but it's like, I think that narrative trick to me was a way to sort of elevate the story just a little bit more off the page and make it feel really modern. So I was a huge fan.
Jen?
Yeah, I agree. And I think Randall, I knew you had seen an early screener too. And so I think I actually texted you on the way home. I was like, I got to talk about this because I had the same experience of knowing what was going to happen and then having my mind blown. And I think that the changes he makes, I think it's a better ending, I think. And it reminds me of The Mist in a lot of ways. I wonder if King would say the same thing. But I remember on our episode, we had this kind of long conversation because I take the ending as really hopeful. And I came out of it thinking, yes, I'm reinvigorated. Like I felt like full of life watching it. And then Justin, Mac's brother, had a completely different read. And I was shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, wait, what? Maybe we did ruin, so it was just, I love that too.
Yeah.
That both of us had completely opposite reads of this because I agree with you, Randall, that the ending of the novel is abstract. And I think this is abstract in a way that is still saying something, but you can just choose to interpret that the way you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that I liked most about it, because Randall tipped his hat that something was different. Not necessarily the end was different, but so I wasn't sure where that was going to come. And then obviously, what's changed. But I liked that, and the talkback that we had too. It was just like there were different interpretations of a very clear-cut ending, I thought, which was great for me because I do like the ending of the novel. I'm the odd man out, but yeah, I was worried. I was concerned, like you were, Aaron, about the connecting with these characters because you spend so much time in the novel, and how you can do that in such a short runtime and all that. And I just thought the actors really were selected perfectly for each of those characters, because there were no small parts, right? Like they really got those characters across in such a short time, where there were people that were being blown away like 15 minutes in, and I was finding myself like, oh, like I didn't want them to go, like so. Yeah, it was kind of an impossible task, and I think we were all kind of worried about it. When we had been hearing about it forever.
That's the thing is,
I can't believe it actually came out.
We do news episodes where we talk about a lot of projects that never come to fruition, and we've been talking about Long Walk for like years because Frank Darabont was attached to it for a long time before. And then Andre Overdahl was attached to it before Francis Lawrence took over. So we track all this stuff. So we live with a lot of these adaptations for years before they ever come out. And like Salem's Lot, like God, we talked about that for 3 or 4 years,
Yeah.
And then so it's like, I feel like just because we have to, we almost build them up too much, and we have high expectations. And so Long Walk was just such a refreshing moment because I was like, Justin and I saw it together early, and I think we both we go in very skeptical because I think we're just cynical about a lot of like film adaptations these days. And we both walked out and kind of looked at each other like, was that as good as I think it was?
Well, you got the sense that they really cared. There was a genuine sense of shepherding a project and saying, we're going to do this so that it serves King, so that it serves the fans, that it's faithful, and like you say, and it also is risky. You're doing things that are unexpected and appreciated, at least by this fan.
Yeah.
We're winding things down. I do thank you all so much for joining us for October. Do y'all have any fun October plans or things that you like to come back to in October to celebrate the season?
I'm going to be watching a lot of horror films. Obviously, we always do this. I'm actually pointedly doing it for the pod this year. But there's always these haunted houses here in Chicago that I've been frequenting every year by year. I love to go back and do that. My wife and I were just talking about making a list of things that we want to do for the spooky season. So one thing that we haven't done is actually go to the Music Box of Horrors since, I guess, probably since they brought it back from COVID. I have not gone back, and she's never gone, so I'm kind of toying with maybe doing that this year.
The Music Box does have an incredible roster of movies. It's not just the 24-hour marathon anymore. Like, it is a month-long love fest for horror. Jen, how about you?
Well, I'm too afraid to go to haunted houses. I like my horror on the screen or on the page and no chance of anything touching me.
I'm with you.
But I talked about watching Scream with my son, and now we're going to watch Halloween. So I'm very excited to introduce him to that world. And just, I'm trying to watch a movie a day, and which feels funny because I watch horror movies all the time, but I feel like it's either for a work watch, like I'm going to talk about it or I'm going to write about it. And so I'm going to try to like choose things that I'm really excited to watch. And one of my number one rewatches, it's not a traditional Halloween movie, but it's so scary, is The Autopsy of Jane Doe. Speaking of Andre Orvdahl, so good. And I feel like not as many people know about it. So it's really, really fun for Halloween. And it's one of my favorite genres. I'm not going to say what the genre is because it's a bit of a spoiler, but I just love it so much.
Randall, how about you?
Yeah, as Mac hinted at, we do a thing on the pod every October, or at least we have for the last couple of years, 5 years now, maybe, called Halloween Hell, where a couple of us try to watch like a horror movie every day in October, and we do a couple episodes sort of breaking down, like one halfway through and then one at the end of the month. And I think part of it is about the endurance test, and then about like being exhausted by the end, and that's part of the fun and like comedy of it. But yeah, so I'm trying to watch a horror movie every day. I think I'm gonna watch that new Final Destination movie because I haven't seen it yet.
I loved it. Nice. Oh, can't wait to read that. It's
good. So yeah, and then but no, I was thinking about like what movies I revisit, and I don't have a ton. I feel like for me, I don't like, Jen has like, I know you have like a handful of horror movies that you love to revisit.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a rewatcher.
Yeah,
me too.
With horror, I'm not really, but like there's one that I really, really love that I think I associate with Halloween, and I love to revisit because A, it's short, and B, it's like insane, which is House. The
oh sure,
yeah.
1985 William Catt. Oh, you mean Hausu?
Hausu, yeah.
Yes,
The
Japanese
movie. I thought you were talking about the medical drama.
No, no.
So many different viewpoints.
Yeah, no, the Japanese movie. If I'm not being hyperbolic when I say it's like one of my top 3 favorite movies I've ever seen, and I adore it. I think it's so funny, but also really upsetting, and there's so much going on in that movie. So that to me, and then also Eraserhead is a movie that I love to revisit just because the vibes I think are impeccable when it comes to Halloween. So yeah.
Something that became a movie that I've rewatched multiple times now over the last like 5 years or so is Ghost Watch.
Oh, yes, that's a good one.
Just because it's available now.
Yeah.
And then and I always like to watch The Haunting, the 1963's Haunting. That is such a vibe.
Yeah. Hell House LLC, another
I
really
love that movie.
That's a good one too.
There's a new chapter coming out.
I know.
There is.
Landed on Shudder.
Very excited. Yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. This is delightful, and I could go on for another few hours, but Mac needs to go get dinner. Thank you all. We're celebrating October, and we're doing our Scare-A-Thon. This is the 15th year of Scare-A-Thon, and this year we are sending all of our funds to the International Rescue Committee. They do amazing work all over the world. Below, in the description of this video, you will see the link. Please make a donation. No donation is too large or too small. And every little bit does make a difference. If you think about how much money you're spending on, like, a bag of Halloween candy, that amount of money could make a big difference for somebody. The family size candy is actually going to feed an actual family. So appreciate everybody watching, and thank you for spreading the word. And thank you all to the Losers Club. Everybody go swing by, check them out. Mac, Randall, Jen, thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
So much fun.
And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.